last horse I would really like to touch on was, well, and this leads into how I met Celeste. I had started a warm blood and he was really awesome and taught me a lot of things too. But then I met Cowboy. So I was pregnant and I hadn't really told anyone yet. So I was kind of clearing out the training barn, not taking on any more training horses. Oh no, I was just thinking about becoming pregnant. That was it. Because I met Cowboy in November. So it's so freaky. Like he totally came to me, and I was reached out to by a woman, Kim, and she had bought this sweet boy and brought him home in May actually. And he had an episode and bucked her off. And then she'd been trying to work with him and he was just kind of deteriorating and getting to the place where he was just like so explosive and she couldn't catch him. Then it was like, we can't even catch this horse. So I went over to see him and I just was like, no, I'm not taking any more horses. But then I met him and it took me an hour and a half to catch him. And I was like, okay, I will take him. I can help. And I'm the type of person too. It's like when I meet the people on the horse and I'm like, I just feel that connection. I'm like, no, this is meant to be. So he came to my barn. And he was just so skittish and hypervigilant and like just not okay. And so I just, was doing the connection work and had just gotten to the point where I could touch him, like really pet him and touch him and kind of move him in a circle around me. And he had a very slight inconsistent right front lameness where I was like, that doesn't look quite right. But like it wasn't super consistent. And then I touched his back. And he like curled up like a cat. He like dropped right out from under me. And I was like, oh, that's not good. So had my osteopath out, had the PMF out, somewhat better, but still not 100% better. And to the point where I was like, I really think we should have the vet take a look at him. So we had the vet booked for December 23rd. And this was around like, I think the osteo was there on like the 17th. And in between that time, I saw a post on Instagram and it was Celeste. And I just, again, same, I'm like, just looking at, there's like the search feed and I just saw this post, same thing was drawn, opened it, started reading her work. And I was like, we need to talk to this woman. And I just felt like so drawn to her. And I reached out to her and asked about a consult. And then she said, oh, well, by the way, like if you're a trainer, I'm about to launch this masterclass and you might be interested. And I was like, yeah. And I just, same thing, no hesitation, was like, there's something here. Signed up for her master class. And then on the 23rd of December, Cowboy was diagnosed with kissing spine. I had heard of this kissing spines thing. I'd never seen it in a horse. And I kind of had in my mind, I guess I would picture like, hollow backed thoroughbred or something like, and he didn't look like he had a short back and he didn't look like what I pictured as a kissing spine case. But she said, his x-rays aren't that bad. Like he's overlapping in this one process right where you would sit on him. But he's very painful, he's very painful. We did the injections just like, I think it's like similar to mesotherapy, but just to help break his pain cycle. And then Celeste did the masterclass on January 2nd. And I started the work with him. And within literally a week, I was like, we should get the vet back out to x-ray him because he looks so different. And I was just like, whoa, like what is happening? And I remember me and Kim, his mom, were standing in the arena. And for some reason we were just like, oh, we should take a progress photo. Like we should just do that. And it's funny because I learned after from Daly, an animal communicator. She's like, did you know that they can kind of like give you ideas? It seemed like it's your idea, but really it was their idea. And I was like, no. And we basically put together that he had probably prompted us to take this photo at 2 weeks, because when we put the photo from when he arrived and the photo from, 2 weeks balance or movement method, we were both floored. Could not believe the difference in this horse. And we were like, oh my God, there is something in this work. What is going on here? And he started to change so quickly and his spine came up and his wither appeared. So he was so collapsed through his thoracic sling that when he put his head down, his wither completely disappeared between his scapula. Like there was literally like a hole, like a dip. And he just started to pop up this beautiful wither and his back pain went away. And I was literally like, let's get the vet back. He probably doesn't have kissing spine anymore. And he was such a sweet boy. And he was just so clear in his communication. And he was one who taught me that horses are 100% authentic in how they feel. He really made me question if horses will truly be like, for example, like when I first approached him just to see how he felt about a saddle pad, he like left when it was in my hand. Like I just picked it up and he walked away. He was like, don't even think about it, lady. Like he left. And then about 6 weeks in, I was like, well, it's doing really good. It's feeling really good. I just had tack in the arena and I picked up the saddle pad and he just looked at me and I walked over, put it on. And he just looked at me, picked up, I had a dressage saddle at the time, picked up the dressage saddle, put it on him. He just looked at me and I was like, interesting. I was expecting him to have full like horsey PTSD about tack and that it would have to completely go through a whole healing process and reintroduction of tack. But when it didn't hurt anymore, he was just like, okay, like there was no hesitation. So he really made me question if a horse is still saying no to tack or is still saying no to equipment or to something, is it PTSD, like horsey trauma, or is it that there's still something, right? Is there still something there that they're saying, still not quite sure about that? And I think that's one of the hardest questions to answer because we may not know ever 100% for sure. But I now err on the side of, is there still a discomfort? Because he was the one that said, I'm completely okay with this when there's no pain. And it really made me question that, right? That horses can have that, because some people I feel like they still dismiss pain and say, well, it's just a pain memory. Like we just need to work through it. They'll be okay. And they're okay once I get on them. They still pin their ears and swish their tail and try and bite me when I put the saddle on. But, it's just a pain memory. And I'm like, I don't know if it is. Because like I said, once I learned about nerve impingement or the possibility that there could be nerve impingement and that there could still be some physical discomfort in a horse from Celeste, and I was like, oh, well, maybe these horses have been treated for ulcers and it's not ulcers, it's nerve impingement. That's why they don't want to be saddled. And it just, again, it made me question because he was the perfect example of a horse who was just so authentic in how he felt and how he communicated his discomfort or his willingness based on how he was feeling. And once that pain was gone, he was totally okay with being tacked. So it just, he brought me to Celeste, and like I still tell her almost every day how grateful I am that I met her and that she has chosen me to be one of her apprentices, because I was like, wow, he just gave me so many answers, and he was just the perfect horse to demonstrate and to use her work on to kind of will also help validate it, because she had just launched the masterclass, to the world and had clinicked a bit on her work. But then for me to be able to take it and apply it and have such a profound change in a horse was just like, wow. Because some horses change very quickly, in one session, and some horses take a little bit longer. But to see it with him, it was also just so validating of her work as well, to see, wow. And in 12 weeks, we had the vet back and she x-rayed him and confirmed that we'd resolved the kissing spine in 12 weeks, because he no longer had a clinical presentation and he no longer had the touching vertebrae. We created space in his vertebrae on radiograph and resolved his pain and behavioral presentation. So, in 12 weeks, she was like, I walked in the barn and she'd already taken the x-ray and she just looked at me with her mouth open and was like, well, what did you do? I'm like, I did this balanced movement method thing. He made me question, again, that true authenticity. And I know I've had conversations with Shaylee about this when people say, oh, my horse will, spook to get out of work, or my horse will do this because, and I'm like, I don't think they have that capability. And she's like, no, they're just so authentic. Like they're so in the moment. Their frontal lobes don't have that capacity to scheme against us. There's obviously some very brilliant horses, but they're so authentic and they're so in the moments that they don't do things to, get out of work, or unless it's for a reason. And seeing that from him was like, oh, okay, this can be different.
Knowing what you know now and having gone through this journey with all these different horses, if you were to go back to Sugar Bear, what do you wish you had known, or what do you wish you had then that you have now?
This balanced movement method work, 100%. Because when Celeste, she did her lecture And I'm like, oh my God. And at one point she talked about how there's the potential for birth trauma. And what she says is like, that foals may not fully unfold. So when they come out through, the birth canal, their scapula kind of get a little bit sucked up and then they come out. And I got looking back at full photos of him, and he was always a classically downhill quarter horse. He was a very like front end type turner, but he was very fast in how he did it. And I looked back at a full photo, and there he is standing with his little scapula strangling his like C6, C7, his head like straight up in the air, and his withers basically dropped through his scapula from when he was a foal. And then as I was looking back through our photos, like throughout his lifetime, and I'm like, he has always been overdeveloped in his neck. He had these super, super tight, ripply shoulders. And I even have a photo because my osteopath would work on them and they would like all smooth out and they would look completely different. But then within, a few days, they'd be all tight and he'd be like all tight again up around the scapula. And I never had that answer of, why is this happening? Like, what can I do differently as a trainer to have him move differently and these shoulders not be so tight? And no one could give me that answer. And then in hindsight with him too, his lack of thoracic sling led to his front end lameness and likely some nerve impingement. So if I would have had this work, I feel like I could have done so much more for him to bring him out of his dysfunction. And then I almost giggled to myself because I'm like, he was a phenomenal horse. Like he had run a couple 19-second pole patterns, which are very elusive. Like there's only a few horses that can run 19-second poles. And he was consistently a 20.0 horse. So he would run phenomenal times consistently throughout his life. And I'm like, and he did that dysfunctionally. I'm like, he did that with like access to half his body. So I'm like, imagine how fast he would have been if he had also been correct. Not only would he have likely done it without pain, because in hindsight, like he was still going in and winning for me, probably uncomfortably, but comfortable enough that he could do it. And I'm like, he was such a phenomenal athlete and had such a huge heart that he probably would have gone in on a broken leg. But I'm like, not only would he have been probably pain-free and still probably running, because he just loves, like I said, he's just a performer. Like he loved to compete, but he would be sound. And he would be more present in his body. Like I did actually go and see him last summer because he lives with my sister. He's retired out about 4 hours away from me. And he was always this more of like a hypervigilant horse. He was always scared of plastic his entire life. I could ride him through at fairs when they have the amusement parks and stuff, like the rides. And I could ride him through, all of the commotions. And he'd been so many places, but you pull out plastic and you crinkle it and this horse would lose his mind. So he was always kind of that hypervigilant guy. But when I went to see him and started to introduce this work to him, the processing that came out of him and the presence and the changes, like he's 22 now. So my sister does some of the work with him, but I'm like, oh, but just right. Like so many of us are like, if only we could go back. But I honestly feel like he was such an example of what can go wrong. And like he ended up with hock arthritis as well. And, I know now that, well, if they can't balance their trunk with their thoracic sling, then the hocks and the stifles overwork. So when we're asking these horses to go from full gallop to a stop and their trunk is not in balance, then they're going to overload their hocks and their stifles as they try and stop. So now knowing what I know moving forward with performance horses, any horses that want to do sudden stops, we need to make sure that their trunk is able to be balanced so that their pelvis can mobilize properly and they can actually use their full range of motion in their hind end to also bring them to a stop. So there's so many things, but really in hindsight, if I would have had this work, I could have done so much more for him, but I don't look back on it with, guilt or anything like that, because it's just this journey that we're on. Right. And I think the easiest rabbit hole to fall down is when we look back at horses and go, oh, if only, if only, if only, but I don't want to get stuck in that energy. I just want to keep, learning and loving him for what he did and being grateful that he taught me as much as he did and that he brought me down this journey. And now he's quite happy and quite still full of personality in the field, just enjoying his life, and he is pasture sound, which is fantastic. And my sister is a trimmer, so she actually keeps him comfortable, and a body worker. So she does what she can to keep him comfortable. But I can't emphasize enough, and I have to giggle, I'll say it, because people say, oh, that balance through movement method, like some people call it a cult because they see so many people advocating for it. But it's like, once you step into this work, it's so life-changing that you just want to scream it from the rooftops. So there's so many people that see, and like in this group, that's what's been so amazing, is like we're helping people learn to see the dysfunction and how common the dysfunction is in every discipline and breathe and riding, and it's everywhere. And when you see it, you can't unsee it. And that's why so many people recommend it for so many different things that people will, they'll post on Facebook, or they'll say like, oh, they'll present a horse and say, oh, it's got SI pain. And someone will be like, you should check out the balance through movement method. But it's because it's all connected. The body is so holistically connected. And when the trunk is not in balance and the thoracic sling is not functioning properly, it affects the entire horse. And it'll maybe present in one horse as SI lameness. It may present in another as, lower cervical dysfunction. But it's a whole program that addresses the whole horse, and it helps so many different things. But my deepest dream, and that I want people to realize, is that if we start horses with this work, we will not see the amount of lameness and dysfunction. If we can teach them how to balance their trunk on the ground before we ever put a rider on their back, and we teach them how to move in this way that supports a rider and supports their body supporting a rider before we ever weight them and then train in a dysfunctional pattern, we will have sounder horses across the board. And I think that's why so many of us are so passionate about it, because we see how it's not only just for rehab, it's for starting a horse, it's for performance, and how in hindsight, it could have helped so many horses in my life. And I'm so grateful for it. As you can see, I could go on and on, but I would say that definitely Celeste's work and knowing what I know now would have been able to help Sugar Bear, and probably, in hindsight, maybe even prevented his lameness. But now we know.
If you had any advice to give someone else whose horses are starting to take them down this path of discovery and learning in whatever direction, what advice would you give?
I think it would be to learn how to communicate with your body language with your horse, and how to acknowledge that horse's communication with your body language. I would say that is such a profound thing to do, to offer to your horse that you see them and that you hear them, and how that can be such a complete change in the way that they will show you things and work with you. Okay, if I could offer one key thing that I think would change relationships and like help owners down this journey with their horse, is to learn how to communicate with your body language to the horse. So I say like how to ask and acknowledge with your body language. When I'm meeting horses, when I'm doing in-person consults, if a horse, I always say, leave them wherever they are. So if they're in their field or they're in their stall, and when I'm walking up and they point out to me which is their horse, when that horse lifts their head or makes eye contact and like sees me for the first time, I stop. From, it could be, 10 feet outside of the stall, it could be 150 feet away down the laneway as they're in the field, but I just stop and try to offer them from that moment, I see you seeing me. That is where it can start, is before you're even literally within their energy field, is you can acknowledge them and that you see them seeing you from so far away, and then carry that in how I interact with them. So when I groom them, how I come to their head and I ask permission to touch them, and I move around them with that awareness. It's so profound of just, and it's so simple to do. It just takes a little bit of practice and a little bit of awareness within yourself of, where you're moving and what they're saying with their body language. But being able to communicate with your horse with body language is so profound. And that would be the one thing that I really offer, because lots of people have started to come down to this more mindful way of being with horses and interacting with them. And I think, but some I meet, they still are missing this little piece of just how you move around them is communication. And I think that the more we can learn how to ask and acknowledge with our body language, it changes the way that horse responds to you as a human, and what they're willing to say to you and how safe they feel around you. That would be a phenomenal place to start. Obviously, shifting your energy, there's tons of work we can do as individuals, but that body language communication with your horse would be so, so helpful.
That's beautiful. And if you'd like to learn more about Betsy and her work, you can go to balancewithbetsy.com. And that's also your social media handles.
Yes, they're all the same.
So find you on Insta or Facebook.
Yes.
And for more information about our host, Meredith Crawford, visit thelab.horse. Thanks for listening.